Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, you are gonna play Nelson. Well, quote, you're gonna play Nelson. This is how it's gonna work. We're gonna have the white pieces, and I'm gonna give you two potential moves, and one move is gonna be a good move, and the other one is gonna be a bad move. And you have to think about what move you should do. Okay, so here we go against Nelson. We're gonna be white, and here we go. Okay, against Nelson, should we move the pawn to e4, or should we move the pawn to a3? Think about it. Okay, we should move the pawn to e4 because we get a pawn in the center, and it controls the center, and it opens up lines for the queen and the bishop. Moving the pawn to a3 is not a good move because it's not controlling the center. So we go ahead and move the pawn to e4. Let's see what Nelson does. Okay, Nelson moves the pawn to e5. I'm going to give you again two potential moves. Think about what the best one is. The first move is knight to f3, or should we move the pawn to a4? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay. The best move is to move the knight to f3 because we want to get the knight toward the center. Okay, moving the pawn to a4 is not good because we're not controlling the center. You've got to get all the knights and the bishops out. So we're going to go ahead and move the knight to f3, and it also attacks this pawn. Nelson, he moves the pawn to d5. Okay, I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first potential move is, should we take this pawn, or should we move this pawn up to g4? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the better move is to take this pawn. If we move the pawn up to g4, that would not be good because the bishop would just take our pawn. That wouldn't be good. So I'm going to go ahead and take this pawn. Let's see what Nelson does. Okay, so he moved up the pawn. I'm going to give you two potential moves. Should we take this pawn? Or the second move is, should we move the knight over to g5? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the best move is to take this pawn. We do not want to take, we don't want to move the knight to g5 because it's not safe. The queen would just take it. So we're going to go ahead and just take the pawn. Okay, so what should we do in this position? Nelson just moved the pawn to e4. I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first move is, should we take this pawn, or should we move the knight over to d4? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the best move is we're going to go ahead and take the pawn. And you might be asking, if we take this pawn, can't this pawn take this knight? And the answer is yes, but if the pawn does take the knight, then we can take the rook. Moving the knight over to d4 is not a good move because it's not safe. The queen can just take the knight. So we're going to go ahead and move the pawn to b7. Okay, and Nelson immediately just takes the bishop pawn with the bishop. Okay, I'm going to give you two potential moves, okay? First potential move is, should we move the knight over to a3, or should we move the knight back down to G1. We're gonna definitely move the knight to G1 because the pawn can just safely take the knight. Moving the knight to A3, this is not a good move because then the pawn can just take the knight. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and undevelop the knight. Again, ideally we don't want to do that, but if you notice right now, the knight has no good squares right now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go here. Okay, so the knight goes to F6. What should we do against Nelson? I'm going to give you two potential moves. Should we move the knight over to C3, or should we move the queen over to H5? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, we're gonna definitely move the knight to C3 because it gets the knight toward the center. Moving the knight to H5 is not good because the knight can just simply just take the queen. That would be tragic. Okay, so we're gonna go knight to C3. Okay, knight goes here. Okay, two potential moves. The two potential moves is, should we move the knight over to A4? Or should we move the bishop to C4? Okay, I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, we're definitely going to move the bishop to C4 because we gotta get the bishop out. If we move the knight to A4, this is not good because we're moving the knight 2 times in the opening, and that's not what you want to generally do. So bishop to C4. Okay, knight goes to E5. What should we do now? I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first potential move is, should we move the knight over to H3, or should we move the bishop to B5? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the best move is to move the bishop to B5. And the reason why we want to do this is because if you notice, the knight is attacking this bishop, and it's okay to move the bishop 2 times because the knight is threatening to take the bishop for free. Therefore, it's okay to move the bishop. When we go to bishop to B5, we're checking the king. Moving the knight over to H3 would not be good because, first of all, the knight is on the edge of the board, and this knight can simply just take the bishop for free. That would be a complete disaster. So we go ahead and go bishop to B5, and that's checking the king. Okay, and then Nelson moved this bishop here. Okay, so I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first potential move is, should we take this bishop, or should we take this pawn with the knight? I'm going to give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move here is we're going to go ahead and take the bishop with check. And then that would be good. And moving taking the pawn with E4, that would be a complete disaster because it's not safe, because the knight can just take our knight, and that wouldn't be good. It's always important to ask, if I move here, is it safe? I'm going to go ahead and take this bishop with check. Okay, knight takes. Okay. I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first move, the first potential move is, we're going to go ahead and go knight to F3, or should we go knight to E2? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move is we're gonna go ahead and go knight to we're gonna move the G knight over to E2 because we're getting the knight out. Obviously, moving the knight to F3, this is not safe because the pawn can just take it. Again, it's important to ask, if I move here, is it safe? So let me go ahead and just go right over here. Okay, so his next move is rook over to B8. What should we do now? I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first move is we're going to go ahead and castle. And then the second potential move is to move the knight over to D5. Okay, I'll give you some time to think about it. The right move is we're going to go ahead and just castle. Moving the knight to D5, this is not safe because the knight and this queen can simply just take the knight. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and castle. Let's see what he does. Okay, so he moves the pawn to H5. I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first potential move is we're going to go ahead and so the first potential move is knight to G3, and the second potential move is to move the pawn to H4. I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and move the knight over to G3. That's the right move because now we're threatening to take this pawn. Because notice that the knight on C3 is also attacking the pawn, and he only has one protector. Moving this pawn to H4 is not good because this pawn needs to protect the king. The king is kind of exposed. Okay, so we're gonna go. We're always gonna make the best move. So we're gonna go knight to G3. Okay, so he moved the pawn to H4. I'm gonna give you two potential moves. Should we? Okay, so the first potential move is for this knight to take this pawn. And then the second potential move is we're going to go ahead and take this pawn with this knight. So this is a decision. Which knight should take this pawn? I'll give you some time to think about it. The right move is we're going to go ahead and take this pawn with this knight because this pawn is attacking this knight. It's always really important to ask, what is my opponent attacking? Okay, we don't want to lose a knight for a pawn. That's not worth it because the pawn is worth 1 point and the knight is worth 3. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take this pawn. Okay, so he took it back with the knight, and I'm going to give you two potential moves. The first potential move is queen goes to G4, and then the second potential move is knight takes knight. I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move is to take the knight with our knight. You want to ask can I safely capture a piece? The knight can just safely just take this knight, right? Moving the queen to G4, that would not be a good move because we can simply just take the knight. If we just move the queen to G4, then this knight can simply just take that knight. Or it could just move back. But again, if you can safely capture a piece, go ahead and take it. So I'm going to go ahead and just take the knight. Let's see what Nelson does. Okay, he goes there. Okay, two potential moves. Okay, the first move is rook goes to E1, and the second move is pawn to g4. What should we do? Sorry, I don't want to go g4. How about pawn to... Okay, so sorry. The first potential move is rook to e1 or pawn to g3. I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay. So this is kind of tricky. I think that... well, I have to just be basic right now. I am going to go ahead and go g3. And the reason why is because I don't want black to take this pawn. If that is the case, then this rook would be attacking the pawn on h2. If this queen gets over to h4, then black would be threatening checkmate. That would be pretty bad. But I also think that rook to e1, I also think that this would also be a strong move because the rook is on the same line as this knight and this king. So on the, I guess to be on the safe side, we're going to go ahead and go g3. I hope that this is making sense. Okay. And if you like what you're seeing, I invite you to subscribe to my channel if you have not done already. Okay, two potential moves. Okay, so Nelson moved the queen to d5. Should we move the knight over to c3, or should we move the rook over to e1? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and move the rook over to e1. And the reason why we want to do this is because the queen is threatening to capture this knight. When we move the rook over to e1, the rook is protecting the knight and it's also on the same line as this king. Moving the knight back to c3, it seems like a good move because it does protect, the knight is safe on c3, but the problem with this move is the queen can safely go to g2, and that would be checkmate. So it's always really important to be aware of what squares the queen can potentially go to after you move a piece. So I'm going to go ahead and go rook to e1. Okay, and it is our turn, and what should we do next? So I'm going to give you two potential moves. We can move the pawn to d4, or the second move, or the other, or the second move, potential move, is to go queen to g4. So which move should we do? Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and go d4. And the reason why we want to do this is because we gotta attack. We gotta get this bishop out. It also attacks the knight. Moving the queen to g4, that would be complete disaster because the knight can just take the knight. So the knight can take the queen. So we go ahead and go queen to d4. Okay, and what should we do now? Okay. Okay, so the first move that we can do is pawn takes knight. That's the first move. Or the second potential move is we can move the knight back to c3. So which one should we do? Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and just take the knight with the pawn. Moving the knight to c3 is a complete disaster because the queen can simply just go to g2 and that would be checkmate. So I'm going to go ahead and just take the knight with the pawn. Okay, and it is our turn. What should we do? The first potential move is to for this knight to take sorry, the first potential move is to move the knight over to d6. The second potential move is to take the queen with the rook. Okay, the best move is for the rook to take the queen. If we move the knight over to d6, then the queen can just take the knight right now. We want to just keep things simple, so we're gonna go ahead and just take it. Okay, it is our turn. So what should we do? Now the first potential move is pawn to b3. Or should we move the king over to h1? Okay, the best move is we're going to go ahead and go to b3. We don't want the king to go to h1. It's just kind of passive right now. And the thing is, like, yeah, so we're going to go pawn to b3. Okay, so two potential moves. The first potential move is we're gonna go ahead and go to f4. That's the first potential move. The second potential move is pawn to c4. What should we do? The right move, I believe, is pawn to c4. The reason why is because this rook is attacking the pawn, and we don't want this rook to safely capture the pawn on c2. So that's why we want to go c4. Moving the pawn to f4, I'm not a big fan of that because Nelson can do en passant. So we don't want that. So let's go c4. Okay, two potential moves. The first potential move is bishop to b2, and the second potential move is to move the rook over to d6. Okay, so which move should we do? Okay, the right move is we're gonna go bishop to b2, and the reason why is the rook can safely take the pawn. And we don't want the rook to safely take the pawn. So if we move bishop to b2, it protects it. Moving the rook to d6, this is not a good move because the bishop can simply just take the rook. That would be a complete disaster, by the way. So it's really important to ask, can my opponent safely capture a piece? It's this pawn. So I'm going to go ahead and move the bishop to b2 right now. Okay, it is our turn. And the first potential move is rook to e1. That's potential move number 1. Potential number 2. The potential number 2 move is to move move the pawn to a3. Okay, so which move should we do? Rook to e1 or pawn to a3? Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and move the pawn to a3. When we do that, the pawn is attacking this bishop, and that would be good. The bishop needs to go away. Moving the rook over to e1 is not safe because the bishop can just take the rook. So I'm going to go ahead and go pawn to a3. Okay, it is our turn. Nelson moved the bishop to 8. Okay, so potential move number 1 is to move the pawn to e6, and potential move number 2 is to move the rook over to e1. Okay. In this position, it seems to these moves seem to be okay. I prefer rook to e1 because it's attacking this pawn. Moving this pawn up to e6. I'm not a big fan of this move because the bishop is no longer protecting the pawn right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go here. Okay, and it is our turn. So potential move number 1 is to take this pawn, and potential move number 2 is to move this pawn up to b4. Which one should we do? Okay, the right move is I'm going to go ahead and move the pawn up to b4. And the reason why is because I don't want this rook to safely take the pawn on b3. If the rook is on b3, notice that it's attacking this bishop, and that would not be good. And also notice like we have a really nice pawn group right over here. So we're gonna definitely go rook to, pawn to b4. Taking this pawn, not good because again the rook can just take the pawn on b3. So I'm gonna go ahead and go b4. Okay, so Nelson moved bishop to b4. What should we do now? I'm going to give you 2 potential moves. Move number 1 is to take the bishop back with the pawn, and move potential number 2 is to take this pawn. Which one should we do? Okay, the best move is to take the bishop with the pawn. And the reason why we want to do that is because the bishop is worth 3 points. The pawn is worth 1 point. So of course we want to capture the piece that has which is more valuable. So we go ahead and take this bishop. Okay, what should we do now? Potential move number 1 is to take this pawn, and potential move number 2 is to move the bishop to d4. So which one should we do? Should we take this pawn, or should we move the bishop over to d4? Okay, obviously look at this. The best move is to move the bishop to d4. We do not want to take the pawn. And the reason why is because this rook can just simply just take the bishop. Okay, so it's always important to ask, what is my opponent attacking? You don't want to lose your bishop for nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and go bishop to d4. Okay, it is our turn. He just took the pawn. What should we do now against Nelson? The first potential move is to take the pawn with the rook, and potential number 2 is for this rook to take this pawn. So potential move number 1 is to take this pawn. Potential number 2 is to take this pawn. Which one? Okay, the right move is for this rook to take the pawn on e4. And the reason why we want to do that is because it's safe to take this pawn. And also, the other reason why is because this rook is protecting this bishop. The reason why it's a mistake for this rook to take this pawn is because this rook can simply just take this bishop for free. So rook takes. Okay, what should we do now? Okay, potential move number 1 is to take this rook, and potential move number 2 is to move this pawn up to f4. Okay, what we should do is we're gonna simply just take the rook to we're gonna simply just take the rook on d4. Moving the pawn to f4 is a complete disaster because Nelson can just simply just take a rook on e4. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take it. Okay, it is our turn. 2 potential moves. The first move is for the rook to take this pawn, and the next or the other move is for this king to go to h1. Okay, the right move is we're going to simply just take the pawn on a7 because it checks the king. Moving the king to h1, it's just very, very passive. The king is not doing anything. Again, if you can safely take a piece, go ahead and take it. So we're going to go ahead and just take this pawn against Nelson. Okay, it is our turn. What should we do now? Potential move number 1 is for this rook to take this pawn, and potential move number 2 is to just move the rook. Well, no, that's okay. So potential move number 1 is to take the pawn, and potential move number 2 is to just move this king over to f1. Okay. The best move is we're just going to go ahead and just take the pawn because it's free to take. Moving the king to f1, it's okay, but it's on the passive side. So why not? We can just take this pawn. So we're going to go ahead and take this pawn. Okay. And potential move number 1 is to move the king over to f1, or potential move number 2 is to or potential move number 2 is to move the rook over to h7. Okay, the best move here is actually king to f1, and the reason why is because this rook can safely move down to e1, and that actually is checkmate. So again, if we move rook to h7, complete disaster because the rook is going to go to e1. So we're going to go king to f1. Okay, okay, so Nelson moved here. What should we do? 2 potential moves. The first move is for this rook to take the pawn, sorry, to simply just take the rook on d5. And the second move that we can do is to move the pawn to g4. Which one should we do? The best move is simply just take the rook. On d5, we're up a rook, so why not? If you're up material, you want to trade down. Moving the pawn to g4 is a complete disaster because the rook can just simply just take our rook on d4. So we go ahead and just take it. Okay, what should we do now? The first move is we're gonna go ahead. The first move is to move the rook over to e7, and then the second potential move is to move the king back to g1. Which one should we do? Okay, the best move is to go to e7, and the reason why we want to go rook to e7 is because it forms a wall. This king cannot go to the e file, and then our plan is we can simply just move this pawn up and get another queen. Moving the king back to g1, that wouldn't be good because it's just very passive. In this point of this game, we want to promote the pawn to a queen. So we're going to go rook to e7. What should we do now? Two potential moves. The first potential move is pawn to g4, or should we go ahead and check the king? The right move here is to simply just move the pawn to g4, and the reason why we want to do this is because we really want to just get a queen. If we check the king on d7, it just checks the king. It doesn't really do anything. Okay. So it's always important to have a plan. So we're gonna go g4. Okay, what should we do now? Nelson moved here. Should we check? Or should we move the pawn up? The best move in this position is to move the pawn to g5. We just want to get a queen. Moving the rook over to e4, it checks the king, but it's not that great. I mean, it's okay, but it doesn't really help us in the long run. Okay, so we're gonna go pawn to g5. Nelson moves here. What should we do? Should we move the rook to d7, or should we move the pawn to g6? Okay, if you've been listening to me, we wanna just get a queen. Checking the king right now, it's not really gonna help us. And this rook right now, it is doing a really good job forming a wall. This king cannot cross the e file. So we're gonna go ahead and go pawn to g6. Okay, king goes to c4. What should we do now? The first potential move is to move the rook over to e4 and check, or should we move the pawn to g7? Again, the best move is to just move the pawn to g7, and because we want to just get a queen. If we move the rook over to e4, that is an okay move, but again, it's not the best move because we're just simply just checking the king, and it doesn't really help us. So we're going to go ahead and move the pawn to g7. Okay, king goes to d4. What should we do? Two potential moves. Should we get a queen, or should we move the rook over to e4? Again, the best move is for this pawn to promote to a queen on g8, moving the rook over to g4, onto e4. This is not safe because the king can simply just take it. So we're going to go ahead and promote it to a queen. Okay, what should we do now? Should we move the queen over to c4? Or should we move the queen to d8? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and move the queen to d8, and the reason why we want to do that is because we are the queen is controlling the d file. We want to push this king back on the edge. Moving the queen to c4, this is not safe because the king can simply just take it. So we're going to go ahead and go queen to d8. Okay, what should we do now? The first potential move is rook goes to c7, and then the second move is to move the queen to d3. Which one should we do? I think that both moves are actually okay, but the easiest way to do the checkmate is we're just going to simply move the rook over to c7 because it is controlling this the C file. Moving the queen over to c3, it does check the king. I think that's okay, but we're gonna go ahead and just move the rook to c7. Okay, what should we do now? Two potential moves. The first potential move is to move the rook over to c4 to check the king, or should we move the queen over to b7? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the right move is we're going to go ahead and move the queen to b8 because the queen is controlling the b file. This king is stuck. The king can't go to the b file. Moving the rook over to c4. I'm not a big fan of this move because the king can go to the b file. So let's go queen to b8. Okay, what should we do now? Should we move the rook over to c3, or should we move the rook over to a7? I'll give you some time to think about it. Okay, the best move is rook goes to a7, and if we do that, then that would be checkmate. Checkmate is always the best move, so I'm going to go ahead and go rook to a7. And we won! I hope you had fun, and if you liked this video, I invite you to subscribe to my channel.